Namaste everyone, this is Vishwa again. So today I'm going to talk about Sankhya and yoga philosophy. So let's understand what is Sankhya and yoga philosophy today. One is the school of rational dualism and other is the school of practice. Many people practice yoga but they don't have much foundation of the philosophy. Yoga is just not the asana practice, much more and beyond that. So it's important to know that what is the basic philosophy of yoga. So first I'm going to start with Sankhya philosophy, which is the foundation of yoga philosophy. So let's take the Sankhya philosophy first, the school of rational dualism. So Sankhya means knowledge or jnana. Literally, Sankhya means number or that which sums up. Having said that, it's also called the mother of mathematics, Ayurveda, and yoga. Yes, the foundation of yoga philosophy is Sankhya theory. And it is also used in Tantra philosophy. When I will talk about Tantra later at some point, you will see how the Sankhya philosophy fits in. The founder of this Sankhya philosophy is sage Kapila. The importance of Kapila is such that Krishna in Bhagavad Gita mentions his name, that in the sages he is Kapila. So Kapila wrote Sankhya Sutra containing 526 sutras around 700 BC. However, the original text got lost and it is not available today. But one of the disciples in that tradition wrote the commentary on it, and the name of that text was Sankhya Karika. And that's how this information retained and got passed down, and we have it available today. Now let's go into the main features of Sankhya philosophy and discover that what Sankhya deals about the creation and everything else. So Sankhya philosophy is a dualistic theory. It's called realistic dualism. So what do you mean by Sankhya dualistic theory? So to understand the dualism, understand like day and night, good and bad, just opposite in nature, mother and father. This is just for understanding, but in Sankhya in the same way there are two main principles and they are called Prakriti and Purusha. In Tantra the same Purusha and Prakriti take a different understanding. One becomes Shiva and other becomes Shakti. However, keeping the scope right here in the Sankhya, I will only refer Purusha and Prakriti. So now I'm going to talk about the two main principles or two main objects which must be known in order to fully understand the universe according to Sankhya philosophy. And the first principle is called Purusha or the consciousness, and the second is Prakriti or unconscious principle, which is also called nature. It's said that Purusha is like the knower, pure consciousness or ultimate truth, which is the energy, but it is choiceless. However, Prakriti is like the known, which we all can see and feel in this nature, in this creation, which is primordial will, primordial matter, and the creative potential of the Purusha, that is awareness with choice. But Prakriti cannot exist without Purusha, but Purusha can exist without Prakriti. The root cause of this entire universe is Prakriti, not Purusha, according to Sankhya philosophy. So now you know that the Prakriti is the mother of the whole creation. So let's understand the components of Prakriti or the nature. So Prakriti has 24 components, and including the Prakriti. So as you can see on the diagram, Prakriti itself has three inherent components, which is called three guna. The lightness, which is sattva, activity, which is rajas, and inertia, which is tamas. When these three qualities stays in equilibrium, the nature stays unmanifested. But when this equilibrium gets disturbed, nature comes in manifestation. So now you can ask the question how this equilibrium gets disturbed. That happens because when a Purusha comes in contact of Prakriti. So just to give you a metaphor, assume the Purusha like the father and the Prakriti is like the mother. So when the father comes in touch with the Prakriti or the mother becomes pregnant and the equilibrium gets disturbed. And thus the mother gives the birth of the next 23 components. And these 23 components are nothing but the part of the Prakriti. So the very first thing which is born out of this unequilibrium state is the Mahat, the cosmic intelligence. And on an individual level, it is called the Buddhi or intellect. Out of that, the next thing is born is Ahankara, or you can call it I amness or false ego. Now, this Ahankara, since this is born out of the nature, so it also contains the quality of sattva, rajas, and tamas. So there are three kinds of ahankara inherently in this box, which is sattvic ahankara, rajasic ahankara, and tamasic ahankara. So sattvic ahankara gives the birth of mind or manas, through which we perceive things. From the sattvic ahankara, again, we have the 5 sense organs, 5 organ of actions. And the rajasic ahankara is nothing but is the movement between sattvic and tamasic. However, the tamasic ahankara gives birth to other 10 elements. 5 of them are the subtle elements through which we can hear the sound, we can touch, we can see the form, we can taste and smell through the nose. And then the 5 gross elements, which you know, the space, air, fire, water, and earth. So including the nature, these are 24 components of the Prakriti. So now I'm going to talk about the practical teachings of Sankhya, in which it talks about the mind, that mind is the cause of our bliss into the misery. So now let's talk about the practical teachings of Sankhya philosophy. Sankhya says that it is mind which turns one's bliss into misery by just its projection. So Sankhya emphasizes to polishing the mind to filter the right knowledge. So it's actually focusing on the Jnana Yoga, the knowledge. It discourages the external rituals because people perform without understanding of its true significance. It also reminds to examine one's thinking process, to purify and develop proper attitude towards objects of senses, to minimize the attachment and aversions, because all our life we are just running around either towards attachment or running away from the aversions. And lastly, it also advises to not run away from the world, but have perfect mental control to stay in control during ups and downs of the life. So next I want to talk about the theory of causation of Sankhya philosophy. I referred to this theory in my previous video in Nyaya and Vaisesika. Both of them rejects or refutes this theory. So what is this theory? This theory says that the effect pre-existed in the cause before manifestation. So for example, when a pot is prepared out of clay, the pot already existed in the clay, though in a potential form. So basically it says the main logic behind this theory is something can never be produced out of nothing. So the original cause of everything is seen as Prakriti. So that is the core principle of Sankhya. And from here we're going to further move into yoga philosophy, and we will understand what yoga philosophy is, how the relationship comes with Sankhya, and then what are the differences and similarity. Just to mention here that Sankhya does not believe in God. We will come to know how and what are the reasons they give that not to accept the existence of God. So let's dive into yoga philosophy now. And yoga is called a school of practice because it emphasizes on practice. Again, the yoga word comes from yuj, the root word yuj, that means to yoke or to unite, and it also means to concentrate. The yoga, what I'm going to cover here, is authored by or compiled by Patanjali. However, yoga existed much before that. So yoga, the word yoga, the practices of yoga are found in Rig Veda. It is found in Tantra. It is found in Upanishads. It is found in Bhagavad Gita and many other scriptures. So yoga is technically attributed to Hiranyagarbha. Hiranyagarbha word is used an aspect of God. But here Patanjali was given the credit because he is the one, the most intelligent person, the way how he took all the knowledge of yoga and compiled in a very systematic way, and that's what we are going to understand here. This compilation was done by him around 200 BC. Text he wrote was called Yoga Sutra or Patanjali's Yoga Sutra, containing 196 sutras. So let's see the main features of yoga philosophy. The very second sutra of Yoga Sutra of Patanjali says Yogas Chitta Vritti Nirodha, the definition of yoga. It says the complete mastery over the modification of the mind is called yoga. So now you can understand that this philosophy deals with the mind. It says that all the suffering, all the pain, all the pleasure happens because the modifications of the mind. So like I have listed here, in this text, it focuses on the nature of the mind, stages of the mind, the modifications of the mind, and how to overcome those modifications of the mind. It also talks about the obstacle to yoga and yoga practice. What are the impediments, like 9 impediments and 5 afflictions? And then very systematically it talks about the Astanga yoga. And as you will see, the many other yoga come out of that. Their methods, steps and stages very detailed in the sutras. It also talks about the spiritual power you will gain as you progress on this path, plus the attainment of the highest goal called Kaivalya. This yoga of Patanjali is also referred as Raj Yoga or Royal Yoga. This is purely based on the practice. So as I mentioned that Sankhya philosophy uses 2 main constituents or 2 main principles or 2 main objects to understand the reality. Yoga takes the 2 as is and adds 1 more, and that is super consciousness or supreme consciousness, which you can call it your personal God. So it becomes three main components in yoga philosophy instead of two in Sankhya. So the definition of Prakriti and Purusha stays the same, exactly the same theory. But the special Purusha or Purusha Vishesha, which is the supreme consciousness, is introduced, called Ishvara. You will come to know about the personal God concept of yoga philosophy a little bit further down when I will talk about the God concept in Sankhya and yoga philosophy. Let's dive into the real practices of yoga philosophy. So now I'm going to talk about the Astanga yoga practice, which Patanjali mentions as the 8-limb path. This contains the restraint, observances, posture, control of vital force, withdrawal of senses, which leads to concentration, and that leads to meditation, and that finally leads to the total absorption or samadhi. In the second stage, which is 5 observances, the last 3, I'm not going in detail of each of them because most people are familiar with the 5 yamas and 5 niyamas. The last 3, which is the tapas, swadhyay, and ishvara paranidhan. In English, we can call it zeal, study, surrender to God. Together, Patanjali refers as a Kriya Yoga. And if you take all these 8, the first 5 are external practice in nature, or they are called Bahiranga Sadhana. Also, you can technically call it as a Hatha Yoga practice. Though Patanjali does not talk about Hatha Yoga in the Yoga Sutra. The last 3 limbs, which is Dharana, Dhyana, and Samadhi, Patanjali refers as Sanyam. These are internal practices or Antaranga Sadhana. Technically, that is Dhyana Yoga. So, to be clear, the Patanjali's Astanga Yoga is not the same what Padtabhijoy's Astanga Vinyasa Yoga is. They are two different things. Patanjali Kriya Yoga is not the same what Yogananda's or SRF's Kriya Yoga is. The name sounds similar, but they are not exactly the same. So now you got the understanding about Sankhya, you got an understanding about yoga philosophy. Now let's analyze the differences between Sankhya and yoga philosophy. And then we'll go back to the similarity and then the practices. Okay? So first, the differences. Yoga accepts 3 reality, as you saw, Purusha and Prakriti and Ishvara, that is personal God. But the Sankhya does not accept God. Only 2 principles it accepts. The number 2 is Sankhya primarily emphasizes on knowledge, inquiring the nature of truth. But yoga primarily emphasizes on the practice and the discipline to control the modification of mind. The third is yoga uses Sankhya as foundation, but also borrows knowledge from other sources such as Vedanta. So now let's talk about the creator or God in Sankhya philosophy. Sankhya does not accept the existence of God. It gives the following reason. The number 1 is, if existence of law of karma is assumed, then role of God is unnecessary. And if God enforces the consequence of action, then the law of karma is unnecessary. And then it says, if God enforces the consequence, then either God is egoistic or altruistic. And if so, then God won't desire to create a world full of suffering. And then third, it says that there is no proof of the existence of God, which can be validated using the valid source of knowledge, like those 6 valid source of knowledge I talked about in the first video. So now let's see what yoga philosophy says about the creator or God. So God is referred as Ishvara in yoga philosophy. It's a unique Purusha or Purusha Vishesha. Its primeval teacher or called Adi Guru. It is also referred as Pranava or primordial sound, Om. The concept of God gives hope to the human beings, the one who is perfect, eternal, all-pervading, free from all karmas, and it is your personal God. Third, it says that when individual soul or Purusha becomes free from all sanskaras, then becomes a liberated soul and merges into the God consciousness. The fourth, it says, when ignorance is dissolved, the duality drops and the perfect union of individual soul happens with Supreme Soul, which is the yoga here, the union of these two, the lower self to the higher self. Thus, the individual soul becomes fully liberated from suffering. And the last, it says that existence of Ishvara is Purush Vishesha, can be only known through the scripture. So the practices which is given you first is to identify your true nature, and then through the scriptures you will know what is God. Now let's see the similarity between Sankhya and yoga philosophy. There are 5 major similarities I have listed here. The first one is that both accept 3 valid sources of knowledge, and they are direct perception, inference, and testimony. The second is both accepts the dualistic theory of Purusha and Prakriti. Third, both accepts the ignorance is the cause of suffering. Both emphasizes polishing and controlling the mind. Both uses the rational and practical approach. So let's see what Sankhya and yoga philosophy talks about the creation or the world. Since yoga is based on Sankhya philosophy, so whole thing comes as the root cause of entire universe is Prakriti, not a Purusha. And it is a journey of consciousness or Purusha into the matter or Prakriti. The unmanifested Prakriti is the limitless potential consisting of 3 fundamental forces called gunas, Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas in equilibrium, exactly like I described you before. And the effective contact between the Purusha and Prakriti disturbs the balance of the guna in Prakriti and sets the motion, the process of evolution and creation of the world. So that's the theory about the creation. Now let's talk about the individual soul, what Sankhya and yoga philosophy talk about. 3 main things. First is the individual soul or Purusha is the consciousness, and that is his very essence. The soul is eternal, ever pure, ever detached, and all pervading. There are innumerable souls, as many as the living beings. Just to point it out that the Purusha here, individual soul here, is different than what Nyaya and Vaisesika philosophy talks about. In Nyaya and Vaisesika, the individual soul does not have their consciousness. The consciousness comes from the mind, but here the individual soul has its own consciousness. So now let's see what Sankhya and yoga talks about the liberation from suffering. First, it says that due to ignorance, individual soul forgets his true nature, gets involved with evolutes of Prakriti and suffers. And how and when Purusha got into this mess of suffering can never be answered except by stating that it is beginningless but has an end. Since ignorance or aviveka is responsible for this bondage, liberation can come only from the right knowledge, and that's the core of Sankhya philosophy. However, both agree that the right knowledge is attained by following the 8 limbs of yoga, wherein the individual's soul is the object of meditation, and that's the core of yoga. So now you understand the yoga principle, Sankhya principles, their similarity, their differences. Now we are to the last stage for the practice. This is also a 3-step practice in which you understand the philosophy, reflect on the philosophy, and then use the Astanga yoga practice with consistency, reverence, and non-attachment for a long time in order to get the result. Yoga is basically the practice of Sankhya philosophy in true essence. So this sums up the Sankhya and yoga philosophy today. I will catch you next in the last 2 Indian philosophies called Mimamsa and Vedanta. So you will know how from pluralism we go to dualism, and then we go to non-dualism, means there will become only one entity. Thank you so much for listening. If you like the information, please subscribe, like, and share so that everyone else can also enjoy this.